Testing 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Well, good evening, everybody. I see by the clock on my computer, it says 7 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome. My name is Brad Bergstrom, and I'm lucky enough to be the superintendent here in Sauk Rapids Rice Public Schools. And I want to take this opportunity to begin by saying thank you for joining me tonight for this inaugural storm forecast presentation that I'm going to be doing. We're going to be talking about the fall of 2020 planning. By taking the time to be here tonight, I really want you to know that it means a lot, and I'm hoping that throughout the course of the evening that I'm going to be able to answer some of the questions that you have. I'm also looking forward to getting some of the questions that you might have in regards to what the start of the school year would look like and trying to answer some of those questions as well. So what's our purpose for being here tonight? Well, first of all, I would like to take the opportunity to hopefully introduce myself to you in the community. I've been here for about 5 weeks and haven't had as much of an opportunity as I'd like to be out in the community. So I'll take a few minutes to talk a little bit about me. I also want to take some time and share some information with you about the process and what we've been doing in preparation for the fall and what that planning looks like. I also want to take some time to share with you in regards to the governor's proposal of the Safe Learning Plan for 2021 and make sure that we spend a little time talking about what does that mean. And then I'm going to take a little moment and talk with you guys a little bit about some of the frequently asked questions that we as a district have been getting up to this point. And then finally, throughout the course of this presentation, we're going to be taking questions from you. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, what that format's going to look like. And so as you are asking your questions, I'll get handed what those questions might possibly be, and I'll try to answer them for you in order to, again, help everybody have a better understanding of where we're at and what are some of the pieces that are going on as we prepare for the school to start in the fall of 2020. So let's begin by, first of all, talking about just some housekeeping items. Questions, if you want me to try and answer them, can be written out in the comment section. I want to be clear that we'll try to answer as many questions as we possibly can, but there's no possible way that we will get every one of them done. But what we will do is we'll take those questions, start looking for themes, and then adding them to a frequently asked question document that we're going to be forming and putting out on the website for everybody to have a look at. So you have a common place to go to if you have some questions, or at least a jumping off point to begin that. I also want to let you know that this is really designed about sharing information and trying to learn from the community where your thoughts are at. We're hoping that we're going to be respectful with each other, and even if it's the responses that are not something that you think is most favorable or you'd like to see something different, again, that whole respectful piece is what we're hoping for as a part of the plan that we have here for tonight. And finally, just want to let you know that this session is being recorded, and as soon as we can, we'll take this recording and we'll put it on the website so that you can look at it again, or we can share it with others so who couldn't be here tonight in order to for them to get the information they're looking for. So let's go ahead and let's start a little bit with me. First of all, I'm so happy to be the superintendent here in Sauk Rapids Rice. I'm going to talk a little bit about my family first. I'm married to my wife, Lisa. We celebrated 30 years this past June. We have 2 children. Both of them are grown. Our oldest daughter is 26 and lives in Minnetonka. She's married. And our youngest daughter is 24, just moved to Farmington. And she's hoping to get married in February of 21. We're supposed to get married this past April in Florida, but COVID obviously made some changes for that. A little bit more about me. I grew up in International Falls in northern Minnesota, and spent a lot of my time involved with outdoor activities and playing hockey, which was one of the pieces that was an integral part of my life when I was growing up. My career, I started out as a teacher in a very small school in northern Minnesota, right up on the Ontario-Minnesota border. And during the last 32 years, I've been a teacher, an activities director, a bus driver, a transportation director, a hockey coach, a golf coach, done a lot of different things. Administratively, I've spent time as an assistant principal running an alternative school. I was a principal at a high school, and also spent time as a human resources director in a school before becoming a superintendent. Just prior to coming to Sauk Rapids Rice, I spent time in Thief River Falls in northwestern Minnesota. Could not be happier to be here and be a part of this district. All of the research that I did prior to applying told me that it's a great community that cares about the schools, and the staff here are committed to doing what's right for kids. And in the 5+ weeks I've been here, that has proven to be more than true. So that's a little bit about me and my family and where I've been and how I've gotten here. So next thing that I'd like to do is spend a little time talking with you about the school planning that we've been doing up to date. I came here on July 1st, and so prior to that, the administrative team was spending time looking at what are the pieces that we need to do in order to put together the best learning plan possible. We learned on June 18th from the governor that we are going to have to develop, all schools across the district will have to develop 3 plans for the upcoming school year. A distance learning plan, a hybrid plan, which is partially in school and partially remote, and then also planning for an in-school model. So since the middle part of June, we have spent time as a district developing what that plan is going to look like. Over the last several weeks, we've been trying to do a really good job in terms of making sure that we're communicating with staff and communicating with the community. We've been doing videos, we've been sending out Skylar email messages, we've been putting things on our website, and just trying to help people to understand more of where we are at in the process. Our goal was to be able to share the plan that we would have for the start of the school year the week of August 10th through the 14th, and at this point we are still on track to be able to do that. So that's what we've been doing and trying to get put together up to this point. This last week, the governor of Minnesota shared a plan in terms of what school is going to look like for the fall of 2020. He's called it his Safe Learning Plan 2020-2021. And there's some really key components that I want to make sure that I highlight for everybody who may not have had a chance to digest all of the plan that the governor has rolled out. Number one, it is not a one-size-fits-all, but rather allowing local districts to have some voice in what that process is going to look like. So again, looking at more control, but also understanding that it's going to be based upon COVID-19 cases and looking at them over the course of a given 2-week period. The governor's plan also makes sure that we're using data to make those decisions. And so at the end of the day, that's really, the districts will be allowed to make a decision based upon where COVID-19 cases are in a community, or in this case, in a county. Districts will need to make a decision at some point prior to the school year starting. Some are making the decision very soon. Some are waiting till closer to the school year. Again, our plan is to roll out what model we're going to be using sometime the week of April 10th through the 14th. This will be a school board decision inside of the guidelines that have been established by the governor. A couple of key notes with this. Number one, it is not easy to be less restrictive than what your data is saying at any point in time in terms of COVID-19 cases. There are a few exceptions. I won't get into the weeds with that, but for the most part, what your data is saying for your county case rate is that's the plan that you're going to have to follow. It can be more restrictive. It just cannot be less restrictive. And again, what this means for school districts across the state, including ours here in Benton County, is that we will need to make a decision based upon where we're at with active COVID cases in our community. So at this point, that kind of gives you an overview of where we've been up to this point. And next, what I'd like to do is spend a little time sharing with you, and I'm going to move this real quick here for you. I want to spend a little time talking with you about some common questions that we have been getting asked. And again, I want to reiterate to anybody, if you have questions that you'd like for me to try and be able to answer, please know that we can go ahead and try to do those through the comment section. I've got some wonderful people here that are taking a look at those and will hand me those questions as time is going along. I'm getting a note here that maybe it's a little hard to hear, so I'll try to speak up a little bit and use my former hockey coaching voice to see if that will work a little bit better. Okay, so we'll give that a try and see if people can hear a little bit better. So the first question that I have for you is really one that we get pretty regularly, and that is it possible that my child's school will be face-to-face, hybrid, and virtual throughout the school year? And the answer to that question is absolutely, that could certainly be the case. Depending upon how COVID cases are going in the county and what those records are showing, if the cases are going down, we can be less restrictive and moving towards an in-person model. And if we're in an in-person model and those cases are going up, we would have to move to a more restrictive model. Again, it's the number of cases and exposure in a community will drive what model any school district will be able to use as we begin looking at the beginning of the school year and as we move throughout the course of the school year. Another question that we're getting asked is, will parents, guardians be able to choose between virtual or distance learning even if the district is in a hybrid or an in-person model? When the governor created his plan, he made it very clear that any school district in the state of Minnesota, whether you are hybrid or you are in person, you still have to offer a distance learning plan. There are a couple of key reasons why we have to do that. Number one is that there may be people students, for example, who have underlying health conditions that being in school would place them at risk. And so because of that, the distance learning model would be something that would be a better fit for them to keep them safe. And so therefore, we have to have that. A second reason why we have to do it is that during last spring when we did distance learning, there were students across the district that found this model to be very helpful for them. Families may choose to continue to utilize the distance learning model as it is a model that works best for their family and for their child. So because of those two reasons, even if we are in a hybrid or if we are in an in-person model, families will still have the right to select distance learning as the best model to meet the needs of their students and their family. Another common question that I'm being asked and that we're getting asked here at the district level is that back in early July, we announced that we would be communicating our back to school plans the week of August 10th through the 14th. I've mentioned that a couple of times already. So the question becomes, why can't the district announce this sooner? And there's a couple of key reasons why it can't be announced earlier. One is that one of the things that COVID has taught us over the last several months is that change is the constant. And what we don't want to do is announce plans too early in advance only to have them change. Now, that could still happen even with the best of intentions, but we want to try and make sure that our families have the best idea in terms of what we're going to be doing with the most amount of time possible to plan and not have to make a change. Number two, the thing that we need to remember is, unlike many years, we are not starting school this year until September 8th. So when we look at August 10th through the 14th, making that decision then, that what it will mean for us is that still gives us about a month for families to plan. Now, the board may decide they need a little bit more time to make that decision, so it might come after that, but we are committed to try and make sure that we get information out as timely as we possibly can, and still trying to stay within that 10th through the 14th time frame to make that announcement. So again, we want to make sure that we are going to have the least amount of change for our families as we get ready to start the school year, and you don't want to go out too early, because so many times we learned last spring is that you make a plan, you have it put together, and you announce it only to have it change because of COVID-19. Another question that we're being asked is, what safety precautions will be in place to protect our students and staff from COVID? We have spent an awful lot of time as a district talking about how are we going to make sure we're taking care of staff and students. The health and the wellness and the safety of our students and our staff members is our primary concern, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything possible to make sure that people are safe. So what are those things that we're doing? Number one, we're taking on some advanced cleaning protocols to make sure that we are sanitizing our buildings to make sure that they're safe. And again, whether it's the in-person model or it's a hybrid, we're trying to make sure those protocols are in place to ensure the safety of all. Number two, we have ordered personal protective equipment, or PPE as it's commonly known. We have ordered for our staff, we have ordered for students who may need to have a mask, for example, because they forgot to bring theirs, or something along those lines. We want to make sure that everybody is protected. Our buses, we've talked with our new bus company, and after buses are used with each shift, they're going to make sure that they're going to be cleaned and sanitized before they head out for the next route. So trying to make sure that we're doing those kinds of things to ensure the safety of our students and our staff is key for us. And then finally, whenever possible, we'll try to use technology to ensure that students that are coming into the building, our staff that are coming into the building, that they may not be aware that they're running a temperature, for example, and are at risk for getting sick. We want to make sure that we're using technology as best we can to meet the needs of our students and our staff, and to assure that their safety is being taken care of. The next question that we oftentimes get asked, and I kind of made mention of it a little bit here already, is what can you tell us about requirements related to students, masks, and/or face coverings? As a part of the governor's executive order, the mandate is that all Minnesotans are required to wear face coverings in all indoor businesses and/or public spaces unless they are alone. This was applicable to schools, including both public and private schools. So the governor's executive order makes it very clear that face coverings are going to be mandated for all who are in a school setting. Now, what can those look like? They can look like a variety of different pieces. Face coverings could include a paper or disposable face mask, a cloth face mask, a scarf, a bandana. Those are just some of the examples. Individuals with medical conditions where wearing a face covering would place their health at risk will be exempt from that. Children under the age of kindergarten, so 5 and under, who are not in kindergarten or younger, they are not required or mandated to wear the mask. And of course, the guidelines are that children under the age of 2 should not be wearing a face mask either. So we will certainly look at what people's personal health risks are, and if it makes sense for them not to have to wear a face covering, we'll respect that right, and it's just laid out in the governor's executive order. And so just want to make sure that we have given you guys some knowledge and some understanding of where we're at with the face covering piece. A couple more questions here before we start getting to some of those that might be coming from you out in the community. Will the district be offering childcare? The governor's executive order makes it very clear that if schools are in a hybrid or they are in a distance learning model, childcare will need to be provided specifically for our essential workers. That definition changes and will continue to be updated, and so that if we are in a hybrid model, we will need to provide childcare for those who are ages 5 through 12. Okay? We will not be able to, we won't charge for those for services provided during the day. According to the executive order, we can certainly charge before school or after school, and that will be a decision that we'll make at the district level in terms of what that's going to look like. But for those who are wondering what happens if we go into a hybrid or a distance learning model, is there going to be daycare? The answer to that question is yes, we will need to provide that, and during the school day, we will not be charging for that. Decision is yet to be made on what we do on the front end of the school before the day starts or on the back end of the day after the school day is over. Another common question that we are being asked is, how will students with IEPs be supported in distance learning? I think we heard very clearly across the state of Minnesota this last spring that if there was an area of concern, it was for our students who are receiving special education services and making sure that their needs are being met. Rest assured, we will work with our child's IEP team to make sure that their needs are being met within the guidelines that are being given to us based upon whether we are in a hybrid model or we are in a distance learning model, or if for that fact, if we are in an in-person model. We'll continue to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our children receiving special education services to the best of our ability. And the last question that I'm going to read to you that we're getting in terms of commonly asked questions is, how will transportation run in a face-to-face model? So as we think about transportation in a face-to-face model, it will run very similar to what had been prior to us getting into COVID-19 this last spring. If we are in a situation where we are in a hybrid model, what that means is bus capacity can only be at 50% of what we could have in there. So if a bus has a capacity of 78 students, for example, we could only load a maximum of 39 students onto there. If we are in person, we could run that bus at full capacity. Again, the ground rules are such that depending upon whether hybrid or in person will dictate how many people we can put onto a bus. So that's some of the common questions that we're being asked as a district, and I wanted to make sure I got those out to you. At this time, I'm gonna, maybe you might see me step off the screen just a little bit. I'm gonna start grabbing some of the questions that are being asked, and I look forward to trying to answer those. So the first one is, disposable masks and PPE, are they latex free? That's a great question. Obviously, we want to make sure that we are taking into account our families and our students and our staff who have latex concerns. And whether they are or they are not, I don't know the answer to that question. We will certainly take a look at that, but know that if there is latex with them, that we will be trying to make sure that we have some options for those who have concerns with being latex. The other thing to remember when it comes to face coverings and PPE is that, it's in particular with the face coverings, is that we're going to ask that families and we're going to ask that our staff have opportunities to bring that material with them. We will have a supply of some that are available for in case somebody forgets one or they didn't have a chance to wash the ones that they had. So for those emergency situations, we'll certainly have some options, but we will not be providing disposable or cloth face masks on a continuing basis for everybody. The cost associated with that is simply just too high, and it's not something that the district would be able to handle. But when we go to our frequently asked questions, I'll make sure that we follow up and take a look at the latex-free question, because I think it's a great question. A question that was asked is, will or could elementary and secondary be on a different plan? That is a great question. One of the things that happened after the governor's announcement is that there was maps that were popping up on social media and other places that were showing what plans would look like in the state of Minnesota. And a lot of people became concerned or thought that, oh, so that's the plan that districts are going to be offering. So number one, no, that's not the case. That was just a sample. And the reason why I make mention of that is as we begin to look at where our data is at right now. So in Benton County, when we take a look at the last 2 weeks, the number that calculates out with the number of active COVID-19 cases we have divided by our total population divided by 10,000, that 2-week average is at 13.58. When we go to the chart that the governor laid out in his Safe Schools plan, if that number is between 10 and less than 20, what that means is at the elementary level, you can be in person, and at the secondary level, you would have to be in a hybrid. Now, that decision has not been made by the district yet. I want to make sure we understand that. But if by chance, to use as an example, if that number stayed where it was at, or if we said this is what we're going to be looking at, we would have a case where elementary students would be in a less restrictive model, being in person, and our secondary students would be in a hybrid model. And part of the reason or the rationale, according to the Department of Health, as to why we can have those differences is purely because the spreading is less likely with our younger children than it is with our older children. And again, we're continuing to learn more about COVID-19 over time. And so that's why the Department of Health feels that we could have this mixed model if the numbers fall in the right place. So to answer the question, will or could elementary and secondary be on different plans throughout the course of the year? Absolutely. And if we use the example of the number we have right now, if we were to start school, one of the possibilities could be is that our elementary kids would be in an in-person model and our secondary kids would be in a hybrid model. Let's grab another question here. What happens if there is a positive case for staff, and what happens if there's a positive case for students? Two really, really good questions. So let's start first of all with staff. One of the things that happens if somebody tests positive, we reach out to the Minnesota Department of Health and they begin to share guidance with us. And one of the truly unique things that we've been learning over the course of the summer, when there is somebody that identified as having a positive case, is it's not just a one-size-fits-all, here's what we're going to do every single time. There are some factors that come into play that dictate what next steps we're going to do. So, for example, if we are practicing really good social distancing, if we have the face coverings that we're doing well, we're keeping students in pods or more in isolation where there's not a lot of intermixing, the response in terms of who may have to quarantine, who may have to go get tested, looks very different than if we don't have some of those measures in place. So the more we can make sure that we are following the Department of Health guidelines and following those to the letter of what they are intended to do, when there is an active case for staff, the response will look very different versus if we're not following some of those expectations. Obviously, following the expectations causes us to look at what we're doing, and things will look very different compared to what we're used to seeing. But these recommendations, these requirements are going to be in place in order to make sure that not if, but when there is a case, we're going to have the least amount of change in terms of what our plan could look like to be able to manage COVID-19 and stay within our framework that we have identified at the beginning of the year or wherever we're at that moment in time, without having to constantly move to a more or less restrictive environment because we're not consistently following what the expectations are going to be. As far as kids go, really a lot of the same pieces. Department of Health will be contacted. Public Health may also play a role in this, and they will give us guidance in terms of communication, in terms of what students or staff, what they have to do, how they have to do it, how long they're going to be out for, those kinds of things. Do they need to go get tested? And we have developed for our staff a really nice flow chart that lays out various options and what it is that we could be looking to do in order to try and give a little bit of a framework of where that's at. But I cannot emphasize enough, the more we adhere to the guidelines as laid out by the Department of Health, Public Health, and the Department of Education, the less likely it's going to fluctuate with big numbers in terms of when there's an active case, what that is going to mean for our students and our staff, and what, if any, changes we may have to make with our learning plans that we have in place. Another really good question here. Excuse me. Will all elementary buildings have the same plan? The answer to that question is we'd like to have them be as consistent as we possibly can. But here's what we do know. We do know that each building has its own culture, each building has its own personality, but there will be some constraints across the district to make sure that we have consistency. So we can't say, for example, under most circumstances, that, well, Mississippi Heights is going to be in person and Rice Elementary School is going to be in a hybrid. The one exception to that might be is if the data shows that it's isolated to a particular building, then there could be a difference in what that plan looks like. But generally, overall, the plans that we have for one building in terms of our instructional model will more than likely consistently be the same. How they go about doing that, there might be some subtle differences in terms of what that looks like, but we want to make sure that we're providing that safe environment for all kids. And again, if numbers dictate that one building can be in a less restrictive than another, and the data shows that, they could be in a different plan for a period of time. But if we're all in the same plan, we want those plans to be executed similarly. And again, in terms of making sure that we are maintaining the safety and the health for our staff. Great question. This next question we have, a really good one, is will there be an effort to keep families in each building on the same days? And I'm going to make a little bit of an assumption with this question, and I'm going to assume that we're talking about if we're in a hybrid plan. And so a hybrid plan is really defined as part of your students are in school and they are getting instruction from a teacher, and another part of your students is usually split 50-50. Another part of them are remote learning at home, and we've got some ideas and some plans in terms of what that's going to look like to try keep everybody consistently together, and we're just working out the final details with that. So when we talk about keep families in each building on the same day, it will certainly be our intention to try and keep households in buildings on the same day if that is what's the best solution for the family. So sometimes we have families that might have different last names, and when we divide by the alphabet, which is the most common way you do it, it might mean that in a household, one student would be on an A schedule with the first group of kids that are being in school, another group of kids, that other student might be with the second group, and they might be remote learning on that same day. We will certainly work with families to make sure that within a household, and that if it's in the family's desires and wishes, to have them come and be in school on the same day in order to ease some of the burden for families. And that will require families to make sure they reach out and communicate with their schools if something that gets missed. Again, if it's best that they're not in there on the same day and that works well for a family, we can certainly accommodate that as well. But again, really working with you as our families to make sure that we're meeting the needs and having people in the same day, if that's the wish, we can certainly try to make that happen. And I don't see that as being a huge barrier. Another really good question here. Can we change the way the child starts the school year? And to help answer this question, I'm going to lay out a potential scenario and then give you the answer with that. So let's say, for example, that the district has made the decision that K through 5 or pre-K through 5, we are going to be in school. and 6 through 12, we are going to be doing a distance learning, or excuse me, we're going to be doing a hybrid. Families will have the choice to be able to also have a distance learning plan or follow the distance learning plan. The governor's executive order is very clear that families who are in either an in-person or if they are in a hybrid model will have the option to switch whenever they want to go to a distance learning plan. That is a requirement of the governor's executive order. Now, when it comes to flipping the other way, so for example, I've started out the year in distance learning, and now I would like my child to go to, they're in 4th grade, I'd like to have them be able to go to the in-person model. When we're going from distance learning into one of the other models, the district gets to make the decision on when that's going to happen. And more than likely, that is going to be at natural breaks, maybe at the end of a trimester, something along those lines. And here's the reason why. It will be very difficult for the planning phase for us if we have people that are constantly bouncing in and out from distance learning, in-person, distance learning, hybrid. And we want to make sure that we are appropriately staffing. We want to make sure that we're doing the best we can to provide the resources for our students, whether they be in the remote model or distance learning model or any of the others. So governor's order, very clear, if you are in hybrid or you are in an in-person model and you make the decision as a family you want to go to distance learning, we can do that right away. If you are in distance learning and you want to go to hybrid or you want to go to in-person, the district will let you know when that time period is, and more than likely that'll fall around the end of a trimester. This is a transportation question. Will there be assigned seats on buses, and will we be able to keep families together? I'm going to answer the second part of that question first. Absolutely, it is our intention as a district to keep families together. When you talk about the social distancing piece, when you talk about the best practices, keeping families together obviously is what we want to be able to do. So yes, as far as assigned seats go, more than likely that will be happening. Here's what we know at this point. When it comes time for student pickup in the morning with transportation, it will be more than likely you pick up and you go to the back of the bus, and then you unload, it go from the back of the bus to the front of the bus, and then you unload from the front of the bus to the back of the bus. Again, trying to limit as much as possible that close contact that can happen when you're on a bus, on your bus, because maintaining social distance is something that's going to be very difficult. So that's where I would keep in families. As far as the assigned seats go, one of the things that I've learned over my time in education is that within the first day or two, it seems to me that most students get into a bus and they go to a seat and they have a propensity to be in that seat. We want to try and make sure that we have the least amount of intermingling as possible. And I think it's highly likely that there will be some form of asking students to be in the same seat on a given period of time. And the question might be, why would we do that? Again, at the end of the day, part of the reason we're trying to do this is that if we have an active COVID-19 case and we need to do that contact tracing, we need to make sure that we know where students were sitting so that we can make sure that we reach out, in this case, to families that they may have come into contact with or close contact with so that they can be made aware. So again, will there be assigned seats on buses? More than likely. But again, my experience has been that most students go into a bus seat and they pick that seat early in the year and they wind up sitting there for most of the time. And again, we'll do our level best to keep families together in seating, because that would be a best practice for us to limit that amount of mingling that could happen when you're on a bus and we're outside of the household with members of the students that are riding the bus. The question that gets asked here is, which 2-week period will you use? I'm going to make an assumption and add some pieces to this. And if the person who asked this question, I didn't get to it, or I misinterpreted the question, please feel free to go ahead and to ask the question again. Just a reminder for everybody: if you have questions as I'm going through this presentation tonight, please feel free to put your questions in the comment section. We have people here that are looking at those and handing me the questions, and I'll try to be able to answer them as quickly as I can. And again, just a gentle reminder that I won't be able to answer every single question. We simply will run out of time, as we're trying to have this be for about an hour is what we're looking at. But we will be looking at all of these questions that don't get answered to begin to, as we build our frequently asked questions document that we'll be sharing with the community very quickly. So the question is, which 2-week period will you use? And so I'm going to take this into two parts. If the question is, which 2-week period will you use in determining when we're going to start the school year, that will be a conversation or a decision that the board is going to have to make. What we learned over the course of the weekend in some webinars that I was able to sit in is it is really truly up to the district to decide what is your jumping off point for your base learning model. One of the things we do know is that families are anxious to know what's the model going to look like. That's why we designated the week of August 10th through the 14th to hopefully be able to share with families what that's going to look like. The caveat with that is that if the numbers change from whatever point in time we pick and they get less restrictive, we would have the option to move to a less restrictive model. If those numbers increase and we have to go to a more restrictive model, that is certainly something that we would have to do as well. So once the school year gets started, according to the Minnesota Department of Health and the Department of Education, we will be using a rolling 2-week time period. So we'll get updates and information from the county where we are at on a weekly basis, and we'll use those weekly numbers plus the previous week to add those numbers together to get where we're at from the state level. But most importantly, what we need to do is we also need to be looking at what's our trending data telling us. So it's not just going to be as simple as looking at, okay, here's the number that the state comes out with. And I'm understanding at this point in time, they're going to be sharing this information with us each Thursday. We're going to have to be looking at where are we at in terms of outbreaks in the community? Where are we at if we have any outbreaks with COVID-19 in our buildings, across the district, in our community, across the county? And so it's something that we're going to be looking at an almost daily basis, because the county will be updating the numbers on a daily basis, with the exception of maybe the weekend. So it is not just as simple as pick this date, here's where it's going to be at. We're also going to have to be watching where our trending data is at. And if our data is trending and going in a downward direction, that's obviously what we'd like to see, so that we have greater options to offer our families in terms of in-person versus hybrid versus remote learning. And I think I'd like to take this moment in time to say that one of the things that we have talked about as a district is our preference to have students getting their education in school. If we can have it in person in a safe manner and meets the needs, health and concern needs, we certainly want to do that. That is something that we feel is the best way to educate children. But what we have to remember is we have to be able to do it in a safe manner. And if our numbers are going in the wrong direction and our cases are increasing, the health and safety of our staff and students will be of the utmost importance, and it may cause us to become more restricted. What we do as a community to help prevent the spread of COVID-19 will certainly help us as a district to not have that potential roller coaster in the constant changes that could happen depending upon what happens with COVID-19 in our community. So if that's not the question that you were looking for or looking to get answered, please go ahead and send another redefine a little bit, and I'll try to answer that for you. I'm going to reach over now and grab another question. If a family chooses to distance learn, can a student participate in sports? The answer to that is a resounding yes. Yes, you can. You are still a member of the district. You're still enrolled at school here. And very clearly, if activities are being offered and as a student who's in distance learning feels that they want to participate in any of our activities, and that could be co-curriculars of athletic nature, it could be some of our clubs and other activities we have, yes, families, students will be able to participate if they're in any of the three models. The key question is going to be, what are we as a district going to be able to offer? And we know that the Minnesota State High School League has been meeting today to begin to talk about what some of those options might look like. And at the end of this presentation, I'll be sharing a little bit of an update with you on that. So great question. The question that's asked is what's going to be the requirement for social distancing at lockers? So couple of really great question, couple of key things that I want to share with you. That first of all, it will depend upon which model that we are in. So let's assume that we are in a in-person model. One of the things we want to do is prevent groups from congregating. And again, it's so in case we have to do any contact tracing, or if there's an active case, we know who are the right people to try and identify to limit the spread of that. So one of the things that will be talked about is, can we adjust when students are going to be dismissed from classes? Again, we want to limit the congregating that's happening. Even if we have face coverings and we are in school, we still want to be able to make sure that we are limiting the groups getting together and trying to maintain the idea that we're not going to be having groups cross-pollinating or spending lots of time together in case we have an active COVID case. If we are in a situation where we are in a hybrid model, one of the key components that happens with that is we have to practice social distancing. During an in-person model, we do the best we can with that, but we fully understand that there are going to be times when you can't. A bus is an example. We know that you can't social distance 6 feet on a bus. If you do, you're looking at 9 to maybe 10 kids, depending upon how big your bus is. And there isn't enough buses in the state of Minnesota and enough bus drivers that would be able to help transport kids. So when we're talking about at lockers, if we're in a distance learning model, the requirement of the social distancing of 6 feet will require us to change how dismissal works. So we're having the least amount of interaction with students, in particular at the secondary level. When you're at the elementary level, as trying to keep those groups together as a class, it's less of an issue because they're going to be spending time in the classrooms. But again, if we're distance learning, if we're hybrid learning, we have to make sure we're social distancing. If we are an in-person model, there's a little bit more flexibility with it, but best practices is try as much as we can to make sure that we have students going in the right direction, all in the same direction. We have people going in and out through prescribed doors, and we have the least amount of congregating at lockers as an example to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. Great question here. What does in-person mean? That's something I've said multiple times and made an assumption there, so thank you for this question. In-person means that we will basically be going back to what we had for an instructional model and kids coming to school like we did prior to COVID-19 hitting last March. Okay, now, will it look different? Yes, there will be the face covering requirements. We will try as best we can to make sure that we have people going in the same direction. You see that in grocery stores as an example. We will still be trying to do some things to not have groups of people congregating, but what it means in person is that all students whose family choose to utilize this model rather than distance learning will be going to school every day, meeting with their teacher and doing the learning like we were doing prior to the spring in March when COVID-19 hits. So that's what in-person means, and hopefully that helped clarify that question. We have several questions in regards to temperatures. And so the questions are, will student daily temperatures be taken upon entering the school building and upon exit of the bus? What are we going to do with temps, and then temps daily for students and staff? One of the things that we know is that one of the key indicators for a child or for a staff member, for that matter, with COVID-19 is the running of a temperature. I want to reiterate that what we know at this point is that's not the only factor. COVID-19 you have to have at least a couple of different indicators. And what we know over time is those indicators are changing. For example, early on, if you had a cough and you were running a temperature, that was two of the indicators. Now the cough piece isn't even in the CDC and the Department of Health's listing as one of the key indicators. So what we do know is temperature is still there. We are exploring as a district the idea of trying to offer up an opportunity for there to be a systematic check of students and staff upon entry of the building to see if they are running a temperature of more than 100.4 degrees. That's our use of the ability for us to use technology to make that happen. And at this point, we're just trying to make sure we can get the equipment in and get it set up. We do know and have as a plan, we want to do it in the buildings, and we're trying to make sure that we can do that on the buses as well. One of the hitches that comes in with the school bus, and particularly because we live in Minnesota, as we get into the wintertime, when the door opens up, and so if there is a device that is walked by for students to be able to check and see what their temperature is, that when the cold air comes in, that may have an impact on whether or not what the temperature of the student is. We also have some pieces to work out that if we do this, what happens if somebody does have a temperature and there's nobody at home. And so we're working through the details of that, and if we can make this work, we certainly would like to do that. What are some of the best practices other than that we can do? Staff and parents checking their temperature, and for those symptoms of what are the COVID-19 symptoms, doing those on a daily check is certainly something that would be advisable for people to do. The question that I think that comes to my mind is, why would we want to enter into this idea of having students be checked? Why would we have that for staff? Number one is we don't want somebody inadvertently spreading COVID-19. We also know that as we get into influenza season, that those two diseases mask themselves as being very similar. But part of the reason why we're looking at doing this is when we surveyed our community members, our parents, and also our staff, one of the things we clearly heard is that taking care of the health and safety of our staff and our students is of utmost importance, and this can be a way for us to be able to do that. We hope in the coming days to be able to share more explicitly where that plan is going to be at. But just to let you know, it is a conversation that we've been having, and if we can make this work, we certainly would like to do that. We also understand that for some families, the daily temperature check might not be possible. So again, to help for the safety of all, we're going to see if we can't make that work and put those devices into place in order to help us be sure that if somebody is exhibiting a symptom of having a temperature over 100.4, we can identify them and help to let them know where they're at, and if necessary, send them home so that they can check to see where their temperature is at, and also make sure, if need be, and other symptoms are showing, to get assessed or checked in case they have COVID-19. So that's where we're at with the daily temperature check. So I decided to grab a couple of questions here. Again, I've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll keep trying to answer as many questions as we possibly can. Can masks be donated? Absolutely. One of the things that we learned this spring here in this district is that we had an outpouring of support from people with donations. And if there are people who are making masks who would like to donate, please reach out to us at the district office if you want to donate them to a school. We know that there is going to be families that are going to be in need of masks and support in order to make sure that children can be safe. And so if that is the case and you'd like to donate, please let us know. Again, we have some guidelines in terms of what those look like. It's on the CDC and Minnesota Department of Health websites. As long as they meet those criteria, absolutely, we will certainly take those and distribute those to our families in need. The other question is, if distance learning, will the district still provide iPads? Technology is an important component of making sure that our students stay connected and our students are getting the material that they need to be successful in their learning. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, and one of the things I'm going to say is that what we experienced last spring with distance learning, while I commend the staff in the district and community partners and businesses, our families, in an 8-day time period, we had to build a 21st century model. And what we learned in feedback from our families is that there were some things that worked very well, and we also learned there were some things that didn't work very well. And as we have developed what distance learning is going to look like, or even what this hybrid is going to look like, it's going to look different. We understand that we have to have more of a routine and more of a schedule. And technology becomes a part of that. And so right now, we know that some of our grades are one-to-one already. And for those grades that are not, we are looking to see how many more devices we're going to need, and can we provide a device for everybody. Again, we're looking at where we're at with our budget. Do we have some partners that are willing to help us out with the cost associated with that? And there will be more information coming with that. But obviously, if we have the devices and we can help our families, that was absolutely something that we will want to do in terms of supporting families in a distance learning model. Our next question is, what model do we currently qualify for under the governor's plan? If we looked at the governor's model right now and looked at Benton County, that number I believe is at 13.58. If you go to the chart that the governor's Safe Learning Plan puts together, that puts us in a model where we would be allowable to have in-person or students coming to school for learning at the elementary level. And right now that's being defined as pre-K through 5. At the secondary level, which is 6 through 12, we would be in a hybrid model, which would mean that we'd split each of the grades up into 2 groups. And group 1 would come for X number of days of school in a given week, and group B would be learning remotely. And then for other days of the week, we'd flip that around. And so B, when they were remote, they would now come to school, and A would go remotely. So that's the model that we would qualify for at this moment in time. And again, could we go more restrictive than that and say, for example, that we're going to be all hybrid? Yes, we could. Again, not saying that's what we will do, but you can get more restrictive. If we wanted to, for example, say, well, we want to have our 6 through 12 come to school and be in person, if we would need to get permission from the Department of Health and the Department of Education. And if we didn't get that permission and just decided, okay, we're going to do it anyways, in the governor's executive order, it's very clear that the Commissioner of Education can come in and order a change. So staying within that framework is that the governor outlined in the plan is something that districts are going to have to do unless there's a qualifier for it that allows some sort of change. Let me just maybe go a little bit deeper with that. So if we think about, for example, in counties that are rather large in terms of geographic. The one county I think of is St. Louis County up in the northeast part of the state. Runs from Duluth, Minnesota up to the Iron Range and north of there. And if the number, let's say, was at 14, we're at 13.5, they were at 14. But if most of the cases were happening in the Duluth area, and as you got closer to the range, that number was at 3 or 4, that district could lobby to the commissioner and the Department of Health to be in a less restrictive model because of what the data is saying. So again, when we are looking at where we're at in our model, it's not just as simple as looking at that number in terms of what the governor or what the Department of Health is sharing. We also have to look at, are there outbreaks happening? Are there possibilities that it's far enough away that we could be in a less restrictive model? But we would need permission from the Department of Health and the Department of Education to make that happen. Okay, a couple other questions here, and I'm looking at, I got the 5-minute warning here. Will classrooms be cleaned between changing if they're switching like normal? We have put in a protocol to make sure that our rooms are being cleaned based upon Department of Health guidelines. We may be looking at hiring more staff in order to make that happen. In an in-person model, for example, high-touch areas, desks, will need to be cleaned down, wiped down every day so that we are making sure that we're providing the safest environment. The one thing that I think is rather unique with this is that when we start talking about getting October, November, and beyond in influenza, because we're using these safe practices for COVID-19, let's hope that it will also help with the spread of influenza during our winter months here as well. So yes, if we're into a hybrid model where some students are in school, some students are learning remotely, when we go from one group of kids being in school to another group of kids, we're going to need to make sure we do a deep cleaning to assure that we've done the best we can to clean those spaces so that, again, we limit the spread of COVID-19 should somebody test positive. The question that's being asked here is, does Stearns County data play any role in where we are at as a district in making our determination? Great question. So the governor's made it very clear in his plan, and the Department of Health has made it clear, is if your county or if your school district has multiple counties inside of its boundaries, you have to take the data from all of those counties, and whichever one is the most restrictive, that's the one you have to use. For us here in Sauk Rapids Rice Public Schools, we only have to worry about Benton County. So because our district boundaries stay within Benton County, that's the only numbers that we're going to have to take a look at. However, as we are looking at trending data, if right next door to us, St. Cloud or Sartell, for example, their numbers are increasing, we're going to have to watch to see where that's at. And the role switches around. If our numbers are increasing, those districts will also have to watch and pay attention to that. So again, to reiterate, because our district boundaries are only in Benton County, we only have to look at the Benton County numbers. But as we look at the big picture and trying to make determinations of where we're at and where trending data is going, we'll obviously be looking at how are things going regionally as well. A couple of final questions here because I got the 1 minute warning here. Our secondary kids stay in one room or move throughout the course of the day? At the secondary level, more than likely, well, I should back up. Ideally, it would be awesome if, in terms of trying to limit the spread, it would be really good if we could have the kids stay put and staff could move. However, when you start taking a look at the secondary level, you're getting into more content experts in terms of licensure, in terms of where people are at. And because of that, more than likely, it will be students are moving, and that's part of the challenge for us is how are we going to do this in the safest possible way in order to assure that we have the least amount of mingling that is taking place. And then the last question that I have here is, would distance learning kids have the same education as the in-school students? And I'll answer that question this way. It is my hope that with the standards that we have to cover, whether it be in school, whether it be hybrid or distance learning, that we cover the exact same standards. How we choose to do that will vary depending upon the model, but we want to make sure that all students are getting the same level of exposure to the content that we want to have covered to ensure that as students move throughout the year and move from grade level to grade level, that we keep an equitable playing field for the learning for all of our students. Well, I have been talking for about an hour, and I'm sure you're probably growing a little weary of listening to my voice. I again want to take this opportunity to say thank you for taking time out of your evening to come and spend a little time listening to me. This was a new experience for me. I feel a little bit more comfortable as time went along. All I'm doing is looking at a green light right now, and hopefully you have found this information to be helpful as you begin to think about where are we going to be at for the upcoming school year with our distance learning plan. Still, I'm sure we have lots of questions to be answered, and we'll try to get to them as quickly as we possibly can. And again, thank you for all of you who put in questions and took the time to give us some feedback in terms of things we need to be thinking about. As I get ready to part, I just want to grab my notes here, make sure that I don't miss anything. One thing I want to let you know for parents and guardians, in the coming days and weeks, we are going to be reaching out to you to ask you some very specific information in order to help us plan effectively. And we're going to do that through a survey. And tomorrow morning, we're going to send out a survey link to you through, we're going to send it out through our normal modes of communication. And we're going to ask for survey information in terms of, will you, if we are in a distance, or excuse me, if we're in an in-person model or in a hybrid model, will you be transporting your student, or will you be needing transportation from the school bus? If transportation is needed, we are more than happy to do that. Do not want the impression to be that we're trying to pawn off transportation on families. But we need to know this information because the building of bus routes is going to look very different in COVID-19 times than we normally do. And so we need to know where you're at with transportation. If some of the time you'll be on the bus and some of the time you will not, then please put that you will be using transportation. We're also going to ask for your contact information, and we need to have this in order for us to be able to plan the routes effectively. We don't want to put too many students on a bus. We also don't want to have a bus that doesn't have enough kids. We want to be effective, efficient with taxpayer dollars and also with our transportation schedule. So this information is going to be coming out in the survey, and we're going to give you a time frame to get this done, and any help you can do in getting that information to us in a timely manner will be exceptionally helpful for us as we begin the planning piece. The other question in the survey that we're going to ask you about is technology, and what we're really looking for is around the idea of, do you have access to reliable internet at home and something other than a phone? I think we learned last spring that with the utilization of phones, people are saying, yep, I have access to the internet, I've got a phone. But when we start looking at data packages, we start looking at multiple people utilizing it, it was not a very effective model. And we want to make sure that we're providing resources for families that might be in need of it, and whether it's connecting them with a local business that is providing internet and getting a reduced rate, or trying to find such thing as Wi-Fi hotspots, which we've done in the past. We just want to make sure we know where everybody is at. And so if you would be willing to answer those questions and get them back to us in a timely fashion, it will be exceptionally helpful for us in our planning piece. We may reach out another time or two with some other specific information, in particularly where you're at with distance learning versus utilizing the model that might be in place. Again, it's to help us with planning, and so that we make sure that we have the proper staffing, we have the proper resources to provide the best education that we can for our children in the safest environment for our staff and our students. I think that's it for this inaugural video or session of Storm Forecast. I hope you found it helpful and useful. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great evening, and go Storm.